Hi, Enda. My name is Elizabeth Muldowney and I live in Drumshanbo and I work in the energy sector, but I'm speaking here tonight as myself. Two things. The first is a question on a national level and the second is an invitation. The first is about the natural resources that are owned or should be owned by the Irish people but are not. I'm led to believe that there are so much natural resources in the Atlantic Ocean, i.e. gas, that we would not need to be beholden to the IMF and we would not need to be beholden to the EU, and in actual fact we would be able to loan money to them if they belonged to us, but unfortunately they were signed away by a corrupt politician in Fianna Fáil in 1987. So I would ask that you would review that on behalf of the Irish people who are losing their jobs, who are losing their homes, their families, and ultimately their lives through suicide because they can't see a light at the end of the tunnel, as we've already heard. As part of that review, I would ask that you look at how these companies who are taking the resources out of our seas and how they are actually taxed. I'm not too sure how it is, but I would ask you to have a look at that as well. The last part is that I would like to invite you to a Get Ireland Working event in Drumshanbo in April 27th, 28th and 29th, where local people have got together to bring jobs to Leitrim and who are having this international event to be addressed by David McWilliams, by a lot of other international people. And I would like to ask you, Enda, not to open it or not to address the main part of it, but to close it. And the reason I'm asking that is that I would like you to actually attend on the main day, which is Thursday the 28th. I know that leaders' questions are on the Tuesday, so you will be free to attend. And I would ask that you would attend on the Friday lunchtime to close the event, having seen the problems, the challenges, and the great work that is being done by local people, and to make a comment on that. Thank you very much.
I'm Cyril McDermott and I come from near Elphin. I'm chairman of the local branch and I'm also chairman of the Strokestown District Executive. Now, I have been in Fine Gael since 1964, which is a long time ago, and I have been involved in many elections. And I'm delighted to say that Enda Kenny has made a tremendous speech here tonight, and the clarity of the way he has spoken, I think, deserves great praise, because we hear so many bad comments. And I am a full-time farmer, and I have a question for you. This climate change bill that Mr. Gormley was trying to get through the Dáil and didn't, thank God, an awful lot of farmers are very worried about that. And what is Fine Gael's stance on that subject?
Just the lady behind her there. Sorry.
I'm Bree Sharkey. I'm from Save the Cancer Services, Sligo. Fine Gael gave a commitment to restore the cancer service to Sligo General Hospital. Now, can you now confirm that the restoration of the cancer services will be included in the first programme for government?
Michael Flynn, I think it's shown down there. This will be the last question, and I'll ask him to reply to it.
Thank you. My name is Michael Flynn and I want to raise an issue regarding health services and in particular issues regarding deaf children. I'm the parent of a deaf boy and I was also the user representative on the National Review of Audiology Services in Ireland, which is conducted throughout 2010. And I'd say at the outset that the people I've met at the front line in the HSE are fantastic people who do an excellent job in very difficult circumstances. And the problem with the service, in my experience, is getting access to the service, the organisation of it, and the prioritisation of services. In a word, the management or the failure to manage those services. Examples of what we learned during the past year. In 2010, there were 12,000 children on waiting lists for community audiology services. 12,000 children. There are audiologist frontline posts vacant all over the country. There's one post in Galway, which has been vacant for 9 years. 9 years unfilled, remains vacant to this day. In Cork, there were over 1,000 suspected cases of misdiagnosis. And arising from all the work we've been involved in, 2 reports have been produced. The first has been the Cork Series Incident Report, detailing the cases of those 1,000 children. And also the National Audiology Review Report, which was completed last year. These 2 reports are the latest in years of reports that have been produced and never published by the HSE. And I'm asking you this evening, will you give a commitment to ensure that both of those reports are published and made public within the first 100 days of you taking office? Thank you.
I'll ask Enda to reply.
I'll take Michael's question there. I agree absolutely with what you say. Yesterday I was in Carlow and talking to somebody there who canvassed a woman who's practically deaf. She has 3 young children and she's been using the analogue hearing aids for the last number of years. And under the service, you're entitled to have them renewed or reviewed every 3 years. And when she went to have her case examined for digital hearing unit, which is much more sophisticated and smaller, she was told that she would have to wait for 7 years before this could be delivered to her. Now, I give you a commitment here in Carrick that those 2 reports will be published within the first 100 days. Respect to the cancer services in Sligo region. Fine Gael have been down in Sligo on a number of occasions, and our spokesman James Riley has been down there. I haven't gone around the country making false statements about reversing everything that's happened in the hospital sector. Otherwise, there would be a list from here to Malin Head. But what we did say in respect of Sligo, that in the situation where the services were still intact, that they would continue. Because we have a philosophy that you should never close anything down unless there's something demonstrably better in its place. Now I know, and you know, that everybody's entitled to the very best chance in life from a medical perspective. And we had the same situation in another hospital in the West with all that being moved to Galway. So from that point of view, we've met with the consultant, met with the medical people, and that situation still stands. I don't want people to run away with the impression that you come to Carrick-on-Shannon and all of a sudden you start making commitments on something that you cannot deliver on. So where services are still intact, we don't want to see them taken away until all of that situation is reviewed. And Cyril McDermott made his point about the climate change bill. You're going to have a climate change bill, Cyril. And we support the principle of a climate change bill, but we did not support the legislating for targets that in many cases are unachievable and are off the wall. Now the government did propose a €30 per tonne carbon tax. We felt that was excessive and recommended that it be reduced by €5 per tonne, which would have an impact in terms of the bag of coal and other fuel. We also wanted to exempt agricultural diesel from that. That bill, as being presented by the government, hasn't gone through and has now fallen. Fine Gael and government will look at a review of what is the most practical, credible and still implementable climate change bill, taking into account the principle that I accept that we must have one, but that the targets have to be realisable and credible in it. And in that sense, I've met with numbers of people involved in the agri sector who've made this point. Elizabeth raised the question of the natural resources. The situation here, and I've been obviously acutely aware of what's gone on for 13 years in respect of the harvesting of the Carrick field, which I support in the context of the best practices, taking into account human life and the environment and so on. Now, when people say there are 400 billion proven reserves off the west coast, the fact is, I'd love to know where they are. We own 200 million acres of Irish sovereign territory under the sea. The map is quite incredible. If you look at it even from space, it goes out beyond Rockall. And that is Ireland's sovereign underwater territory. Now, last summer, an exploration company drilled a well north of Corrib in 12,000 feet of water, 3 kilometres under that. It cost 75 million and proved to be, as they say, a glugger, which is empty, if you know what I mean. And from that point of view, when you do all the seismic tests, it might not actually be feasible at the end of the day. I understand from the people who do these geological and seismic studies that rock formation has to lie in a particular direction, and it's got to be capped naturally by marble or basalt or whatever in order for the drill to actually sink into the rock, through which the gas, if it's gas, seeps to the surface. But what I think we could look at is not only the regime that applied when you were trying to get a balance between technology as it existed in deep water Atlantic, but to look at the situation that we've got a lot of very experienced Irish people who've worked in commodities, oil and gas around the world, and are quite prepared to work in the interest of setting up an entity that would make it more amenable for exploration companies to want to come and explore in the first place. If you drill a hole, well, 3 kilometres deep, and it proves to be negative, and you do that 100 times, the opportunity is not as attractive as if you drill off Mexico or off South America. But from that point of view, I feel that your question is absolutely spot on here, because I'd like to set down in government a system that would ensure that in the event of any future gas reserves being located off the west coast in our sovereign territory, that we should be able to first of all ensure that the state here gets a much bigger income from that over the next 40 or 50 years, which would have a serious impact on our balance of payments. So I have a real interest in this, and spoken to quite a number of interested people who have great experience in that field. If I might just move on from that to say that the water under which the commodities are located are something that Ireland's turned its back on for so many years. There are so many opportunities for further processing of fish on our shores, with consequences for thousands of jobs, but many of these are landed in other countries. And that's within the remit of the Minister for the Marine in terms of direction as to when the quota season actually opens for particular species of fish. And that's something that we should look at. And in the Marine Institute in Galway recently, speaking to the director there, we're actually sitting on an opportunity for a half a dozen world niches here. We've got all the pharmaceutical companies, the medical device companies, the university, the Institute of Technology, the Marine Institute, and we're located in the Atlantic at a crucial point where the streams, the Gulf streams and so on like that, move. And that means that, for instance, if the temperature of the water were to go up by another degree, all the salmon stock would go 1,000 miles north. It's quite incredible what nature can do here, in that fish will automatically locate to an area that's within 2 degrees of what they know is their limit. And just to give you an example of the work that's going on, the Secretary for Energy from the United States was over here recently, Mr. Chu. He was really interested in work that's been done between IBM and the Marine Institute. When the Gulf well blew in Mexico there last year, and all of that oil was pouring into the Gulf, they weren't able to determine accurately what was happening on the seabed and all of that. And what they've been developing between the Marine Institute in Ireland and IBM have been a series of underwater sensors that will receive information, that will transmit information, and that will give real-time analysis of what's happening on the seabed. And in the view of professionals, we're actually sitting on an opportunity here that could be immense in terms of new discoveries, research and so on for very many years to come. And as you know, in this part of the world, we're sitting on a Saudi Arabia in terms of what's blowing up and down the coast every day. The wind and wave power, the awesome power of the Atlantic, holds enormous potential in terms of energy. In 20 years' time, most of the energy requirements in the country are going to be from sort of Dublin on the corridor north to Belfast, where 60 or 80% of Ireland's GDP will be generated. And that's got to be driven by an energy requirement. And in many ways, that energy requirement can come from the west coast, from Donegal down, through wind and wave. And obviously there are sensitivities about turbines and about pylons. But these are things that need to be worked at in terms of high voltage DC, which can be underground in some cases, depending on the cost. So in terms of the natural resources, this is an area that needs constructive and proper analysis. And I'd like to think that the government, that the next government, if it's to be a Fine Gael government, would focus on that in a realistic fashion. As regards having the date with you on the 27th, 28th, or 29th, let's say I'll put it in the diary. I'm not sure what either time or weather permitting will bring forward, but I'll certainly make direct contact with you in that regard, and would look forward to have the opportunity to hear the people from around the region talk about their views and their proposals for job creation in Drumshanbo.